Hello everyone and welcome to my session at Scottish Summit, Instant Accessibility using a Theming Template. So before we get started, let's thank our sponsors. ScriptRunner, DQ Global, Proximo 3, Redspire, Agilysys, and Hitachi Solutions. Thank you everyone. So who am I? My name is Sancho Harker. I work at a company called Pinnacle Group and I develop solutions there. I'm also a Microsoft Business Applications MVP. Microsoft has recognized me as one of the Power Apps champs, and I am a super user on the Power Apps community forums. If you want to look for me on the community forums or on Twitter, look for @IAM_mancat. So let's get straight into the demo. Most of my talk today will be demo. In fact, I'd say almost all of it. There'll be a slide with links at the end of the talk. Okay, so what are we talking about today? We're talking about accessibility, and we're going to talk about how to do that really quickly, or at least part of it, using a template that I built. So I built this template that allows you to effectively drop new controls into a Canvas Power App, and automatically they will be branded. Now you can use that to make easy accessible Canvas apps by having your high contrast themes available at all times, or having a toggle that allows you to set them automatically. So what we can do is, if we go to this little bit.ly link, I'll put that at the bottom here. That will then take us to the community app sample that I submitted. So I've released this for everyone to use for free. And the reason why is I want people to save time. It takes a lot of time to do all this custom branding and customization for your apps. And really, it's a waste of time. If you start adding up the hours, it escalates really quickly. So if there's, this was early last year, but if there's 2.5 million Power Apps developers out there and we spend in our entire career 1 hour changing the properties of colors and items in our apps, that's 2.5 million hours, which equates to 285 years of work time that has just been wasted just changing these control properties. I mean, that's crazy. So there must be a better way is what I was thinking, and I found one and I created it, and it's available for everyone to use for free. So if you've seen me do this talk before, you will know how and what I did for this, and go grab your preferred beverage and come back in a few minutes, because after that we'll be covering some new items that I've not covered under any previous talks. So using this template, if we go to the Power Apps community app samples, you can see here it's featured at the top. It's the second highest upvoted item apart from Matthew Devaney's Collections Cookbook. And using it is pretty simple. You'll just need to download it, open it. So if we go to Power Apps, we go to Open, Browse for File, and you browse to the downloaded file and you open it up. Okay, so we've got this template. It's got a bunch of different screens for us to look through. And before we get into the screens, I'm just going to show the whole power of the template. The idea being, if I just create a new blank screen and insert a few controls, now, in order to change these, normally we would look at going through each of these properties on the right over here. So we'd look at the color property, the fill property, the border color. In the case of items which have different states like hover and pressed, for example a button, we would look at the pressed color, pressed fill, pressed border color, hover fill, hover border color. And that's just for one control. If you've got an app full of controls, you're going to be spending ages changing all of this, when really it should be as easy as someone going to a screen that has all the different themes on it, picking a different one. So let's go for our dark high contrast, and then hitting set theme. And if we go back to this new screen that I created just a moment ago, that's it. Changed. So now we've instantly got an accessible high contrast app that will pass all WCAG 2.1 guidelines. And the biggest part is the date picker, because we still have a date picker in Power Apps where the colors for all the various panels inside the picker can't be chosen. If I go back to the original theme and look at the date picker, you may be familiar with this blue coloring because when you change your app manually, that will remain blue. Whereas what I've done is worked in the actual backend inside the Power App file itself and configured it so that if you change your theme and use the date picker, it will change. And the same applies for any theme colors you choose. And the other thing is that there is a awareness in the app of the theme, whether it's dark mode or light mode. So for example, right now we're in dark mode. So this pen input where it's standard, it would be dark black right now and almost invisible and definitely not at the right contrast value. If I start writing in this now, there we go. So how does this help us? Well, in terms of accessibility, when we have a choice, that is the most powerful thing you can give to a user. You give them the choice of having either a set of colors and fills or the option to have a high contrast, accessible, either dark or light mode theme. So in my case, I've got standard blue themes, light and dark, and then a monochrome, high contrast, light mode, and the same for dark mode. And what we can do is we can actually test the colors we want to pick out by changing in this theme tester screen the colors of these three boxes. So I'm going to change this to this purple, and then I'm going to have my two accent colors as a medium and a light gray. So I can actually see on that color without actually looking it up using a contrast checker that contrast level between that gray and that black text is not good enough. So we're gonna put that as white. And now if I set that theme to test it, it'll automatically change all these items. If I go back to that screen, I can see what that would look like in terms of the items I've created. Without doing anything, we've literally done a one, maybe two click process where you can change a theme from whatever it was to whatever you want it to be. This, in terms of accessibility, is going to save you loads of time. Having high contrast in your apps will make it easier to navigate. There's loads of research that's shown that having highly contrasted items in web pages and apps makes the user who navigate it faster because they're able to quickly discern the difference between items and go to directly what they need. Nobody is immune to making errors, and at the time when I built this template a year and a half or more ago, I had some ideas about how I wanted it to be more accessible. And in the 1.5 years since then, I've become more aware of better ways to make it more accessible. And so I'll be releasing a in-between version 2.5 of this before the version 3 is released. Shortly after this talk drops, I will release 2.5, and it's going to have more accessibility. And I'm actually just going to go through that now and show you, even in my app, I'm going to fix these accessibility issues. I had built a home screen where a lot of items I thought were high contrast and accessible were not as much as they could be. So if I let me revert this back to the original theme. So the idea with this was that these would be easily view and navigable. The problem is that I didn't consider tab indexing carefully enough, and as a result, the focus can't be navigated by a keyboard for this app, and that's not good. That's not accessible. That means someone who can't use a mouse or navigates primarily by keyboard would be excluded from this app. So what do? Well, the way I've built this app is to use a primary, secondary, and tertiary color with respective text colors for each of those, and we can view that in the app on start. I've got some detailed comments in the app on start that you can then go through and see how I did all of it, but effectively we're just setting a variable which I have set in the JSON files inside the .app file to relate to this variable. So we set primary, secondary, and tertiary colors. Effectively, I called them primary color 1, 2, and 3, but that's what they are. They are primary, secondary, and tertiary. And then a color for your default labels, and then advising whether it's dark mode or not. Dark mode, in this case, affects the background color of new screens and a lot of conditional colors for the checkboxes and radio buttons and that sort of thing. Using those 3 colors, we can then make our app more accessible. For example, when I built this, a year and a half ago, I didn't think about how easy it would be to navigate by keyboard, and that was wrong. But this is why we do these things. We can improve. And if I try navigate this with a keyboard right now, there's no way for me to see what I've selected. So how do we improve that? We can get rid of this hover that I built, and we can actually just work on the screen itself. The icon, we're going to give it a width of parent.template width and a height of parent.template height, and its x and y value will be 0 plus 0. And why did I do plus 0? This is so when you copy paste items, they retain the coordinates. Normally when you copy paste an item in Power Apps, it will add 20 or 30, depending on what you're copying, onto the x and y values of an item to offset them against the original item. But if you make it a formula like 0 plus 0 and copy paste it, it will appear in exactly the same location. So if you copy to another screen, it will appear in its intended location. Okay, that's great, but that's not too big. What we really want to do is get some padding to make the icon sit in the middle of the tile, but still allow us to do all the nice hover effects. So in terms of padding, I think 25% of the total should be good enough. So self.width times 0.25, and then we replace all the other to give it a nice bit around the edges. Now I can actually see that's way too much. So let's go 0.1. That's not enough. We want it to be not too large, but not so small that it's not easy to see. So I think 0.2 will be a good compromise. Okay, that's step 1. Now I had this label that was dependent on the height and location of the original icon. Now what I'm going to do is keep that, except I want it to be that icon's y value plus its height minus this icon, this label's height, and then minus 10 to space it slightly off the bottom. This hover and click mechanic that I had before is not very identifiable. What we really want to do is space the actual icon and hover bit slightly away from the edges so that it looks like a panel inside the gallery. So if we make the x and y values 10 and then the width minus 20, so that puts 10 on either side. Now that's slightly better. We can go better than that though. What we can do is right now the color value and the fill value are just default label. What I'm going to do is I'm going to do color value is primary color 1 value, primary color 1 text value, and then the fill primary color 1 value. That's a good start, except now our text is invisible. Why is that? Because the text is below it. Okay, so that's slightly better already. In our hover, we want the icon and the fill to swap around. What we're going to do is hover color is going to be primary color 2 value, and the hover fill is going to be primary color 2 text. Now, assuming that you have properly contrasted your primary color and its text counterpart, this should now be much more indicative that this is a selectable item. Now what we really should do is also make this tab index 0, because right now you can't actually select this item. So if I navigate with a keyboard, you're not going to be able to select it. And if we're navigating with a keyboard, we're going to want to focus on the, well, on the focused border. So let's set that to 4 to give it a nice bit of thickness. Now, I'm going to go and cycle through those again. I should be able to get to my theme palette by doing that. So now we can navigate through the keyboard. And this is really important. This is I think something that people overlook a lot when building templates and building apps, is that some people navigate with a keyboard, and while you may have designed things to be very beautiful for your app, they may not necessarily be accessible. So yeah, think about the focus border and what happens when you're hovering and clicking over items. Now I could do this, I could apply the same logic to this icon here. Currently, the only way I know it's a selectable item is the fact that my cursor changes to a hand icon. But really what it should do is show exactly the same thing as those hovers are doing, where it's got a base color of primary text color 3, and we want it to invert and flip as you hover and then select. So let's make some changes. So we want the fill to be primary color 3 value, and then we want the hover color to be primary color 2 value, and the hover fill to be primary color 2 text value. And then we go again through the pressed state, and that is primary color 1 value, 1 text value, and for the fill, primary color 1 value. And now if we, so now we can see that is immediately obvious that that is an interactable item, and when I press it I can see that an action is happening against it. As you can probably see there, the focused border is not easily identifiable. So if I tab between that and other items, I'm not really aware visually that that has been selected with the keyboard. So let's fix that. So one of the things I like to do is offset icons against, give it a little bit of edge around the icon so that your focused border has some space to be shown. Its current X value is that. Let's take 4 off that. And our height, so we're going to go 0 plus 4. And now our width and height. Okay, so we've bumped it X and Y 4 and 4. So we take our width and height and we minus 4 and 4 for the bit we bumped, and then another 4 and 4 for the bits on the other edges. So in this case, it'll be minus 8, so that's 92, and the height 92. Now, I mentioned focus border before. We're going to affect that now. We want our focus border to be at least 2. I mean, I would recommend closer to 4. And then our coloring is going to be primary color 3 text value. And the reason why is that bar, that is our top bar, is set to primary color 3 value. So no matter what primary color 3 value is, if you've set the text counterpart for it correctly, the focus border for this will always be contrasted correctly because you have set it in your primary colors. You can see there now the hover also gives a slight bit of edge around it, which looks quite nice. If we select it and move along, we can see that's much more obvious now that that is actually selectable by the keyboard, and that we can then action it and go through to the next screen. So now I'm going to jump ahead and apply a whole bunch of different changes to it, and we're going to open that up in a new version of my app. So I'm going to just edit that. As you can see, I did the same sort of paneling with the menu. And I've changed the back arrow and the settings to have that space around it, to have the invert when hovering and clicking, and so that our focus is in the right order. So you'll notice that the focus border for these right now is black. What it actually is that I set it to the text value that contrasts what the current color is for that background. Currently that is primary color 1 value. So no matter what you set primary color 1 value to, as long as you set your counterpart primary color 1 text value to contrast that correctly, if we set our focus border to that text value, it will automatically be contrasts. And I'll show you that by dropping to another theme and going back, and you can see now as I navigate through, it is showing the correct highly contrasted color. And these again have flipped to use their highly contrasted color and border color. So this is much easier. Now, one of the things you want to also look at is the accessible label and the hint text. In some cases you can use just the one, in others you might want to use both, and I'm going to explain why. If we look here on this icon, there's no tooltip. On the accessible label, there's also nothing. Depending on how we do this will affect how a screen reader displays this item. So if I open up a published copy of this app and start up narrator.
Start narrator dialog. Okay. But I am narrator heading level 1. Well, I am _mancat branding. I am _mancat branding template at tablet v2-5 button.
As you can see there, if we try and navigate through this, it's got some things that I've given the correct accessible label for, like
gallery, button, 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 navigate to settings menu, button.
There we go. So that navigates to the settings menu. We know what that does, and if we action it, it's going to go to the settings menu. But if I tried to click that one, it's just button. What does button do? If I'm trying to navigate this as a person who uses a keyboard primarily, or maybe is a person of low vision, or just anyone who's not using a mouse to navigate, how do I know what that does without directly seeing that the icon means or goes back? And the same applies with the gallery. If I'm going through the gallery items,
gallery button,
that is not useful.
Toolbars hidden, notification, turn exiting narrator.
Okay, so we go back. We know that we need to change the accessible label to be more descriptive. Now we could do this statically, but because we're using a gallery with items which happen to have a name, we can go navigate to, and this item dot name, and now our accessible label will say navigate to home screen, and the same applies with our back button. We can either set the tool, I'm going to set the tooltip in this case rather than the accessible label, because what we're going to try is see how that is interpreted differently to the accessible label when read with a narrator or a screen reader. So let's save and publish that. And reopen the app again. Okay, so let's get narrator going.
Hey, narrator dialog. Okay, button, Alt and O. Heads up, narrator heading level 1. I am _mancat branding temp, toolbars hidden. Alert to exit full screen. Move mouse to top of screen or press F11. Navigate back, button.
So now we know that that says navigate back, which is the tooltip. So if you set a tooltip, you're already adding the first layer of accessibility. If you want your tooltip and your accessible label to be different, then you need to make them in a specific way. So if you want your tooltip to say, this button allows you to navigate to the previous screen while retaining the same item that was stored in memory, that is obviously way too long for an accessible label. For an accessible label, we want it to be something short, simple, and effective, like navigate back. So additionally, we changed the accessible label for the items inside that gallery, so I should be able to navigate to them now and hear that correctly.
Gallery, navigate to home screen, button.
So because it's contextually using this item dot name for that item, every time I cycle through,
navigate to chart palette, button.
It will list it correctly. So these are some of the things you need to be aware of when building apps, because it just makes it easier for everyone if you make it accessible and you make sure that everything has a label and a reason, because it might not be obvious to someone else. It doesn't matter if they're having low vision or if they're like me and they're autistic. Some things just might not be obvious, and the more you can give a clear, definitive direction or indication to the user that this is how they should use it or what it's for, the easier it's going to be and the quicker people are going to be able to use your app, and your adoption rates will actually increase because you're making it more user-friendly. Let's get out of narrator.
Start window, notification, exiting narrator.
Yes, okay. One of the other things we can do is, with this template, is create panels. So like what I've done here, but on a much larger scale. So for example, if we create a new blank screen and insert a label here, and let's do another label here, and I'm just roughing these out. Normally I would obviously take the time to get the perfect X and Y values, but I'm just want to rush through this quickly. So in terms of fill, we're going to set the fill for this one to primary color 3 value. So that's basically how I'm doing my navigation bars. I'm offsetting the 3 different values against each other. So we've got a background that's set to 1, this top menu tab to 3, and then we can create a panel here that is set to 2. So primary color 2 value. Okay, excellent. Now we can take that a step further and we can subdivide that panel again. And now to give that an extra layer on top, we go from dark to medium to light, or from tertiary to secondary to primary. So we set this one's fill to primary color 3 value. And then we can just replicate that over here. And over here. So now we've got a basic panel style layout for our screen, and we can insert galleries and other items there. Now that would take too long to do on this demo, so what I've done is I've gone ahead and created a screen full of that. So what we've got here is our existing home screen menu on the left, some tabs over a panel over here, and then within the tabs I've changed it to be the layout to change depending on which tab you're on. So it's the same items, just displayed differently. Now obviously we could also change the items to be different items displaying, but my point is, using this 3-panel layout, you can define sections like this that make it much easier on the eye to navigate, and much more similar to apps you've seen out in the real world, rather than having all your apps just look like Power Apps. So these are functional. They still do what they're supposed to do. So if I select number 3 here, you can see the text here has changed to 333. If I go to 5, 555, and the same if I go to the other pages, it's still got 5 selected. If I change it to 3, 333, it all changes there. And the same with the menu on the left here. This is still functional, it still works. If I hit there, it goes to my theme palette screen. If I go back, it goes back. And how I did this, a lot of it was just setting the X and Y values conditionally using a switch statement. So each of these panels has an ID, 1, 2, 3, and 4. And what I've then done is, if the ID, so switch this gallery dot selected dot ID is equal to 1, then the X value will be 130, if it's 2, if it's 3, etc. And did the same for all the different properties, so Y value, width, and height. Now, this is not the most efficient way to do it. Currently, you should be looking at using containers and the layouts of that, because it makes it a lot easier to make it dynamic. But if you're looking to make a quick, very quick app and focus on just doing some basics, you could do it this way using a switch statement, which then will define the different heights values, X and Y values, for those panels. And then you have the inner panels equal to the outside panel plus 10, plus 10. So that spaces it, like we discussed earlier, it spaces it slightly off. And then you make the width the same width of those panels. So if I select there, you can see that's label mid panel 1, which is this panel here, the slightly lighter one, minus 20, and the same for the height, minus 20. And that just makes it a panel inside a panel. There's a few other things I wanted to just mention which are applicable to screen readers specifically. Some people will create timers that are off the screen. So for example, if I create a timer here, you can't drag it off the screen, but if you set the Y value to 0, I don't know, minus 100, you can see it's actually off the screen there. The screen reader doesn't know that. The screen reader will still pick that up as an item that needs to be read, and it will read the time on that every single time it changes. So as it's counting down, as it's counting up, it's going to be reading that persistently. And it doesn't matter if you set it to look like it's transparent or invisible. You actually have to set the visibility to off for the screen reader to not pick it up. Another thing is that if you're using HTML text, don't use HTML text as an interactable item, because a lot of the screen reader technology doesn't deal with the HTML text correctly. It's better to use them as shadows or containers, because when you're using, I'll give you an example. If I put in an HTML text here, you see there's no tab index value, and that's because it can't be tabbed into. So you can't, it just jumps, you see there, it goes straight from one to left to the right. So you can't actually use that when you're in a keyboard. If you're just using a keyboard, you cannot access HTML text as an item. So it doesn't matter if you've set any kind of bit of text in it, because you might be displaying something that's very key and it looks fancy because you've got it inside a nice panel with drop shadows. Oh, and shout out to my friend Timothy Shaw. If you go onto the community app samples and look at his neomorphism generator, that is super useful for generating these kind of panels where you have a panel with a drop and an up shadow. But you do need to be aware that using that and creating that, you can't use that directly to display items to the user, because while it is an HTML text and you can make text inside that box, when you use a screen reader, you won't be able to tab through it, and so it's not going to be able to read that out to the user. So that is going to be missed. If you need to go check out Tim's neomorphism generator, I do recommend it. Go to the community app samples and look for neomorphism generator. It's super useful. So when you're building apps like this, you know, I through experience know most of the time what is a good level of contrast. But if you really want to test that, what you should do is look at using a contrast checker. There's the WCAG Web Content and Accessibility Guidelines provide levels of what should be a good contrast value between text and color. So for example, this is white text on a dark blue background. Now, if I look at our app on start and get down to the theme, we've gone to the dark blue theme. And that means that we're using this background with this text value. And what we can do is open up bit.ly/contrast checker. And we get to the Web Accessibility in Mind contrast checker, which uses the guidelines from WCAG. So you can see here, it tells you, according to the different levels, whether this would pass or fail WCAG guidelines. So in our case, we're using this blue. Now, 18107, 18107. So I get that. Zero 18126B, and white, which has a excellent contrast ratio of 16.16 to 1 and passes all of the WCAG guidelines. But if I, for example, picked let's go with another blue, like a dark blue like that, it fails the AAA rating for WCAG as it's not quite contrasted enough. So I could, for example, make that lighter and then it would pass. So these are the kind of things you want to be checking when building your apps, because not only for accessibility, but when you make a more highly contrasted app, your speed of navigating through it as a user is much quicker. So there's a lot of other cool features you can enable with this template I've created. One of them is obviously the chart colors, an easy way to deal with the chart colors. Right now you have to manually set them with, with an array of colors, but it should be as easy as just, picking a color or two and hitting set chart colors. And now if I insert a new chart, that will work on that by default. You can also, if we go back to the apps on start, you can also change these manually. So if you comment out this bit where it sets all the shapes as the array for the colors that are used in the graphs, and then just set them all manually here, you could make whatever colors you want and just get rid of the whole chart palette screen. So right now, if I delete this screen, there's going to be some errors because it'll be trying to look at those screen values. So if I take those out and uncomment that, those will now get set to those values. So if I run that again, and then of course we've removed that screen, so we can't keep a reference to that screen. Okay, that's better. So please feel free to download this and create your own apps with it. It requires no licensing and can be used to make any Canvas app. You could even extend it a bit further if you want some information on that. Please feel free to ask me and I will provide you that information. That ability will be included in the future upcoming versions of this template. But for now, keeping them all the same helps with inserting the new screens. So for example, if I insert a new calendar screen, this automatically is branded, and if I go back to my palette, which I have now broken, oh yeah, because I'm setting the chart colors. Let's just get rid of that. So yeah, if I go back to my theme here and set it to dark theme and go back to that screen we just added, it's now all in dark mode. So here's the set of links I said I'd provide. One is to my brand template. The next is to the WCAG contrast checker on WebAIM. And one we didn't get time to cover today is the random theme generator. So you can actually, if you're not feeling particularly inspired, you can actually go to this site, click a button, and it will generate some nice colors that work well together for you to use in your apps. And the last one is, again, we didn't have time to cover it today, but the color blindness simulator. It allows you to paste in images of whatever you're working on. So you take a screenshot of your app, for example, you paste it into there, and you can simulate the different types of color blindness and how they would see that image. And that should help you to improve your apps to be more accessible. Obviously, the contrast is the key thing we want to focus on, but additionally, we don't want colors that are too similar in contrast and in color as to someone with, for example, red-green color blindness. Those two colors would look the same, and so if you're using them to distinguish green for a good result and red for a bad result, those won't be effective for someone who has additional accessibility needs. So I just wanted to say thank you to everyone at Scottish Summit, and thank you again to the sponsors. This recording will be posted and viewable on YouTube in 14 days, and I hope you enjoy the rest of your conference.